I've always considered myself more than just another face in the crowd at Wilson and Partners Advertising. As a creative director, I pour my heart into every campaign, just like my parents taught me, with honesty and dedication. But right now, sitting in my office on the 15th floor of downtown Manhattan, I'm struggling to make sense of what's happening in my personal life. I'm sorry if this comes across as a rant, but I need to tell you about Sarah, my wife, and how everything fell apart. The gleaming awards on my shelf and the view of the city skyline suddenly feel meaningless as I type this. Sarah and I met during our senior year at State University. She was majoring in marketing and technology, her ambition practically radiating from her. We connected at a mutual friend's party. You know those perfect moments when everything just clicks. Her laughter was infectious, her drive inspiring. She talked about revolutionizing digital marketing while I shared my dreams of creative storytelling. We were young, ambitious, and so sure about our future together. After 3 years of dating, I proposed. Nothing extravagant, just us, a bench in Central Park during autumn, and a simple question that would change our lives. She said yes before I even finished asking. We married the following spring, a perfect ceremony in a boutique hotel downtown. The first few years were everything we dreamed of. We bought a modern townhouse in a quiet neighborhood in New Jersey, close enough to the city for our careers, but peaceful enough to start a family. Our neighbors knew us as the creative couple, the marketing guru, and the ad man. We had game nights, weekend brunches, and long talks about our future children. Life felt like one of those perfect TV commercials I used to create. I've landed a big account, Sarah would say, her eyes sparkling with excitement as she'd tell me about her latest projects at her tech firm. I'd listen, genuinely proud of her success, never imagining that our perfect script was about to take an unexpected turn. If only I knew then what I know now. Changes begin. The first signs were subtle, like a slight shift in a perfectly composed image. Sarah's work at the tech firm became increasingly demanding, or at least that's what she claimed. Late nights turned into missed dinners, and our shared moments became increasingly rare. I supported her ambitions. After all, isn't that what a good husband does? But then came changes I couldn't ignore. Sarah, who used to joke about the Instagram influencers we saw in our marketing campaigns, suddenly became obsessed with her image. She started spending hours curating her social media presence, something she'd always found superficial before. Her wardrobe transformed from comfortable chic to designer labels, and she began spending countless hours at premium fitness studios. I just want to look my best for the company, she'd say when I asked, her eyes fixed on her phone screen rather than meeting mine. Image is everything in tech marketing, Michael. You should know that. I wanted to be supportive, to be the understanding husband who celebrated his wife's success. But something felt off, like a discordant note in a familiar melody. Then came the incident with my phone. We were at Whole Foods one Saturday morning, following our usual weekend routine, when I realized my phone was missing. The moment we got home, I searched everywhere, between couch cushions, under car seats, through every drawer and cabinet. Sarah's reaction was strange. She barely looked up from her own phone as I frantically searched. "Just get a new one," she said, her voice oddly flat. "It's probably not worth the hassle of filing a police report." Her indifference struck me as peculiar. This was the same woman who'd once spent hours helping me search for a lost flash drive containing campaign drafts. When I mentioned filing a police report, she became almost agitated. "Michael, seriously," she said, her fingers tapping rapidly on her phone screen. "You're making too big a deal out of this. Just sync your data and move on. Don't you have that big pharma campaign to work on anyway?" Something in her tone made me pause, but I pushed the thought aside. After all, She was right about the campaign. I had deadlines to meet. So I did what she suggested, bought a new phone, and tried to move on. But that nagging feeling, that sense that something wasn't quite right, continued to grow. Growing suspicions. The changes in our daily life became more pronounced. Sarah started taking calls in another room, her voice dropping to whispers. She'd quickly close her laptop whenever I entered her home office, the sharp snap of the screen becoming a familiar sound in our house. One evening during dinner, her phone buzzed repeatedly. It was a simple question, "Who's calling?" But her reaction was anything but simple. "Why do you need to know?" she snapped, snatching her phone off the table. "God, Michael, since when did you become so controlling? I have work contacts who need me at all hours. You know how tech startups are." I sat there, fork frozen halfway to my mouth, startled by her outburst. This wasn't the Sarah I knew, the woman who used to share every detail of her day with infectious enthusiasm. Now, each question felt like navigating a minefield. One evening, while Sarah was at a client dinner, I found myself alone in our home office. The house felt emptier than usual, the silence heavy with unspoken questions. Our shared desktop computer hummed in the corner. We barely used it anymore, both preferring our laptops, but something drew me to it that night. As I scrolled through folders, trying to convince myself I was just organizing files, I found one labeled with a string of numbers. It looked random, the kind of file name you'd overlook unless you were specifically searching. My cursor hovered over it for a moment, my conscience battling with growing suspicion. What I found inside made my stomach drop. Messages. Dozens of them. Between Sarah and someone named David Cooper. The name didn't register at first, until I saw the references to their shared high school memories, their unfinished business. The messages weren't explicitly romantic, but they didn't need to be. The intimacy was clear in every word, every inside joke, every remember when. They talked about meeting up, about how life had taken unexpected turns. But it was the screenshots of conversations between Sarah and Jessica, her supposed best friend, that truly shattered my world. They weren't just messages. They were blueprints for my destruction. A carefully orchestrated plan to frame me for cheating, to make me the villain in their story. My missing phone wasn't lost. It was taken, part of their scheme to create evidence against me. "He's too trusting," Sarah had written to Jessica. "It makes this almost too easy." Jessica's response made bile rise in my throat. "Once we plant the evidence, you'll be free to start fresh with David. Michael will never know what hit him." I sat there in the dark, the blue light of the monitor illuminating my trembling hands as my world crumbled around me. The awards on my desk, the framed photos of our wedding, the life we'd built. Everything suddenly felt like props in an elaborate production, and I'd been the only one who didn't know it was all fake. The unraveling. Over the next few days, I became an actor in my own home, playing the role of the oblivious husband while documenting everything I could find. Each evening, after long hours at the agency, I'd meticulously save screenshots, copy messages, and record conversations. My creative director's eye for detail became my shield, helping me build a comprehensive record of their deception. Then one evening, I overheard a conversation that made everything even worse. I was supposed to be at a late client meeting. Sarah had even texted to confirm I wouldn't be home. But when our biggest client rescheduled, I returned early, only to hear Sarah's voice drifting from our kitchen as I quietly entered the house. "Mom, you don't understand how perfect this is going," Sarah was saying, her voice excited in a way I hadn't heard in months. "David's divorce is finally settled, and once we execute our plan, Michael will be out of the picture completely." Margaret, my mother-in-law's voice, came through what I assumed was the speaker phone. "Darling, you're sure you've covered all your bases? We don't want him contesting anything when the time comes." Jessica's helped me think of everything. We've got messages drafted that make it look like Michael's been having an affair for months. Once we discover them, I'll have grounds for divorce, and David can step in as the supportive old friend who helps me through my heartbreak. They were discussing my life, my future, like it was just another marketing campaign to be executed. The casual cruelty in their planning made me feel physically sick. They even talked about how David and his kids would move into our home, my home, once I was gone. I stood there in our darkened hallway, my laptop bag still slung over my shoulder, listening to them plot the dismantling of my life. The same kitchen where we'd hosted countless dinner parties, where we'd made pancakes on Sunday mornings, had become the strategy room for my own destruction. The best part, Sarah continued, her voice dripping with satisfaction, is that he's so focused on that new pharmaceutical campaign, he hasn't noticed a thing. Michael always was too trusting for his own good. I wanted to burst in, to confront them right there, but my years in advertising had taught me the value of timing. Instead, I quietly retreated, got in my car, and drove to the office. I needed to think, to plan my next move carefully. They weren't the only ones who could craft a strategic response. Confrontation. The next day, I decided to take control of the narrative. Walking into our home that evening, I felt strangely calm, like entering a final client presentation with an ace up my sleeve. "We need to talk," I said, finding Sarah scrolling through her phone on our living room couch. She looked up, her perfectly manicured fingers pausing mid-scroll. "About what?" Her voice was casual, but I caught the slight tension in her shoulders. "About David Cooper. About the plan you, Jessica, and your mother created. About all of it." I kept my voice steady, the way I would when pointing out a fatal flaw in a campaign concept. The change in her expression was subtle but unmistakable. The polished facade cracked for just a moment before she caught herself. But before she could speak, I pulled out my laptop. "I know everything, Sarah. The messages, the plans to frame me, the stolen phone, all of it." I opened the folder containing all my evidence. "I'm ready to walk away without drama if you'd just be honest with me now." She sat there, frozen, her phone forgotten in her lap. For the first time in months, she was looking at me, really looking at me, and I could see fear in her eyes. "How did you?" she started, then stopped. The silence stretched between us, heavy with years of shared history and shattered trust. "It's not what you think," she finally said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Things with David just happened, and I didn't know how to tell you. So you decided framing me for cheating was the better option?" The bitterness in my laugh surprised even me. "Creating false evidence. Plotting with Jessica to destroy my reputation?" She tried to salvage the situation, offering to end things with David, suggesting couples counseling, but it was too late. The damage was done, and we both knew it. I moved out that night, checking into the Marriott downtown while we sorted out the logistics of separation. But life had one more twist in store for me. The revelation. A few days into my hotel stay, my phone buzzed with a WhatsApp message from Sarah. My thumb hovered over the notification, debating whether to open it. When I did, the message was simple but earth-shattering. "I'm pregnant. We need to talk." A photo of a positive pregnancy test followed, along with an ultrasound image from Metropolitan Women's Health Clinic. My stomach lurched as I stared at the grainy black and white image, time seeming to stop in my 12th floor hotel room. At first, I thought it was another manipulation tactic. Sarah was nothing if not strategic, and this felt like a perfectly timed move to regain control. But the time stamp on the ultrasound was real, and the dates, they could match up. I organized a meeting at a neutral location, a coffee shop in Midtown that I'd never visited before. Walking in, I spotted Sarah already seated in a corner booth, her marketing manager polish somewhat dimmed, her usual confident posture replaced with something more uncertain. I know the timing is convenient. She started before I could speak, her hands wrapped around an untouched cup of tea. But it's real, Michael. And, and I think it's yours. That I think hung in the air between us like smoke. She tried to reach for my hand across the table, but I pulled back, my mind already racing through the possibilities and the necessary next steps. We'll need a paternity test, I said, my voice firm but quiet. The words felt strange in my mouth, like dialogue from someone else's life. Her face crumpled slightly. Don't you trust me at all anymore? The irony of her question nearly made me laugh. Instead, I took a slow sip of my coffee, buying time to keep my voice steady. You know exactly why I can't just take your word for it, Sarah. Not anymore. Mounting pressure. The next few days brought a barrage of WhatsApp messages, missed calls, and even unexpected visits to Wilson and Partners. Sarah was relentless, her messages swinging between emotional pleas and veiled threats. You're putting our baby at risk with all this stress, one message read. Mom says you're being cruel and unreasonable, came another. The baby needs their father, Michael. Stop being so selfish. I tried to maintain my distance, responding only to messages about the paternity test and legal arrangements. But then Jessica decided to enter the picture. She requested a meeting at a small cafe on the outskirts of the city, Cafe Luna, a place I'd never been to before. Walking into the cafe, I spotted her immediately. Jessica sat at a corner table, her marketing executive polish perfectly intact, fingers drumming nervously on her phone. When our eyes met, she attempted a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Michael, she started, her voice carefully modulated. I know you must hate me right now. I sat down across from her, maintaining a professional distance. Hate requires emotional investment, Jessica. I'm just here to understand why. She seemed thrown off by my calmness. For a moment, her carefully constructed facade cracked. It wasn't supposed to go this far, she began, her words tumbling out. Sarah was just feeling lost, and when she reconnected with David on LinkedIn, it seemed harmless at first. Just old friends catching up. I listened as she unraveled the whole story, how Sarah's complaints about our marriage had grown, how David's perfectly timed divorce had seemed like fate, how one small deception had led to another until they were in too deep to stop. Sarah was scared of being the bad guy, Jessica explained, fidgeting with her coffee cup. The plan was supposed to make things easier for everyone. Easier? The word tasted bitter. You mean easier than just being honest? She had the grace to look ashamed, but her next words made my blood run cold. David's already threatened to make things difficult if Sarah doesn't handle this his way. He's not the same person we knew in high school. The call. Later that evening, as I was reviewing campaign mock-ups in my hotel room, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something made me answer. Listen carefully, a male voice said. This is David. We need to talk about Sarah. I sat back in my chair, switching my desk lamp on. I'm listening. You're making this harder than it needs to be. David's voice had an edge of arrogance that set my teeth on edge. Sarah's pregnant. She's stressed. And you're playing games with paternity tests and lawyers. What kind of man does that? I kept my voice steady. Years of client management coming in handy. The kind who just discovered his wife and her friends tried to frame him for cheating. Look, he snapped. Sarah deserves someone who can really take care of her. Someone who understands her worth. Not some advertising guy who can barely afford a decent car. The irony of him critiquing my career while plotting to move into my house wasn't lost on me. Is that what this is about? Money? This is about Sarah being where she belongs. His voice turned threatening. Drop the paternity test. Come back home. or trust me, you'll regret making things difficult. Are you threatening me, David? I'm giving you a chance to do the right thing. Sarah's fragile right now. If anything happens to her or the baby because of your stubbornness, that's on you. I ended the call, staring at my phone screen as it dimmed. The whole conversation felt surreal, like a poorly written drama script. But one thing was clear. I needed those paternity test results more than ever. The results. The day of the paternity test results arrived with a weight of finality. The clinic had called to inform us that the results were ready sooner than expected, and we all gathered at the medical center. Sarah, David, and me. The waiting room of the Manhattan Genetic Testing Center felt sterile and tense. Sarah sat with her hands folded over her stomach, while David paced near the window. Manhattan's skyline, creating a dramatic backdrop to our personal drama. I noticed how he kept shooting me smug looks, his confidence apparent in every movement. Dr. Thompson, a silver-haired geneticist with kind eyes, called us into her office. The results lay in a plain white envelope on her desk. Without much preamble, she opened it and confirmed what I had suspected. I wasn't the father. The baby was David's. David's reaction was immediate, a barely suppressed grin of triumph spreading across his face. Sarah kept her head down, her shoulders slumped in what could have been shame or relief. I felt an odd sense of calm wash over me, like the moment when you finally solve a particularly challenging creative brief. I stood up, straightened my jacket, the same one I'd worn to pitch my first major campaign, and looked at Sarah one last time. "I'll have my lawyer send the divorce papers," I said quietly. "You'll need to sign them." She nodded, still not meeting my eyes. David moved to put his arm around her, but I was already walking out the door. In the elevator, I pulled out my phone and sent a quick email to my realtor. It was time to look at those apartment listings in Manhattan she'd sent me. Epilogue. That was 2 months ago. I've since accepted a position as executive creative director at a boutique agency in Manhattan. The new office has a view of Central Park, and my team is young, energetic, and drama-free. Sometimes, when I'm working late on campaigns, I think about how life can change as quickly as a trending hashtag. But unlike the carefully curated stories we tell in advertising, real life doesn't need perfect endings to be meaningful. Sarah signed the divorce papers without contest. Last I heard, she and David were house hunting in New Jersey. I wish them well, in the way you wish well to characters from a story you finished reading. As for me, I'm focusing on writing my own story now, one honest campaign at a time.